Okay, so I will go ahead starting. So we had actually three different topics, and this was the winner, like Lauren already mentioned, mastering the multi-store. So this is a topic that has been actually appearing in quite, I would say, in most, all of the, at least the projects I've been working on. Here or there was always a multi-store topic coming in, either in the go live or either afterwards for expansion reasons. And it's always a kind of a gray area, especially that you have a lot of requirements, a lot of factors that can actually impact the multi-store setup, either initially or later on. So I'll just go ahead with showing you the actual agenda. Hopefully it's moving. Okay, so this is just me without a bird. Hopefully you can still recognize me. And this is the plan for today. So there is an introduction, just a quick introduction on the actual multi-store, the main multi-store setup options, and then choosing the best setup option with an actual use case and with different, I would say, scenarios. And I want to get your opinion there. And then complex use cases that could be based on real cases. And in the end, a summary of takeaways actually from the session. Initially, the multi-store introduction here, I just want to make sure it's clear for everyone what is a multi-store for Spryker Future and what is not a multi-store. So initially, a multi-store could be represented as a business model. For example, you will have different, I would say, business stores. Each one of them is either could be defined as in a way of a country, in a way of a business store, or in a way of a brand, for example. And this is all are actually valid options to go with and choose the multi-store. However, the option, or what is actually not valid to use the multi-store setup for, is the physical stores, because in the end, it's exactly the same setup, the same team, I would say the front end, the same logic, the same business logic, and in the end, it's just kind of a physical store. Therefore, it is really not recommended to use the multi-store for this. There is different ways to solve that. There are some use cases where this was solved by merchants. There are some other use cases where it was solved by actual service points. Actually, the upcoming release for the service point will be tackling this topic from Spryker side, but you will need to wait until the release is there and it's done. However, in the meantime, if you have an actual physical store or a service point representation, multi-store is not a feature for it. Going ahead. So the main multi-store setup option, this is something that you can actually see in some public documentation. We already encountered this in some of the sessions. However, there are like three main setups, and they are mostly, I would say, distinguished by the infrastructure resources as well as by the actual requirements that is required for it. Initially, the default one is the shared infrastructure resources. You have each store with one Elasticsearch and one Redis or key value storage assigned for it. That within Elasticsearch, within Redis, you can have multiple indexes and you can have multiple namespaces. So that's kind of something that actually is used in the case of the shared setup to store or actually document different Elasticsearch documents per each store in different index. They have one shared database, one region with multiple stores, since it's deployed in the same region. It shares the same code base, of course. And finally, you can actually have the centralized third-party integrations together with the deployments. You have also the code buckets where you can differentiate between the business use cases and business logic. So I can actually share the same code base, but you can have different ERP integrations. You can have different checkout process for store A or store B, but it would be still sharing the same infrastructure resources in the same database, which is the most important thing, because in this case, the admin users or the back office users, they are actually seeing the same data. How you can mask some data for each store, this is something that I can explain later on, but initially you share the same database. The second setup, which is the isolated database, is exactly the same as the first one. The only difference here is that actually you have logically a separated database. So you have a table, database for store A, database for store B, and database for store C. And they are all sharing in the end the same instance in infrastructure, but logically they are separated databases. And this allows, for example, for separate data or customer base, products, I will say access in the back office as well could be separated. So this is something that is actually useful when you have a use case of stores that are not sharing the data or the data points between them, as well as the admin users are limited only to see their own store data in the back office. And finally, the famous one that is being used in quite global, I would say, implementations is the separate infrastructure resources. So in this case, you can consider each one of these, I would say, blocks as a different AWS account. Each one of them actually contains their own resources, their own, it could be including its own isolated code base for deployment. It has their own deployments because it's a totally 3 different AWS accounts. Therefore, it allows for infrastructure or performance boost, especially if you have huge loads for one of the stores or for all of the stores. It includes also the separated data for the different stores. And additionally, the one that is why it's being used is different regions as well. So you can also have the Europe region, which within you can have multiple stores or multiple countries, which would use in the end the setup number 1. And then you would have the second region, for example, the China region, and then it would still use the setup 1 as well within it, or it would also use the setup 2. So within the setup tree, each one of these blocks can either be a setup 1 or a setup 2. And it could be in 3 different regions or multiple regions, more than 3. And it has different deployments. It can share the same code base, or it can have an isolated code base. So this is the 3 most famous setups. Normally, you can see this in the documentation. There are some more details on the high-level characteristics, the differences between each one of these. And normally, when you want to decide on which multi-store setup, you go to the documentation, or you already know from a high level, and you are actually presented with these details. But still, it is very hard for you as an architect or as a dev or as a tech owner with the topic to actually decide on which option you would like to go with, because there are multiple factors that you need to kind of decide on to choose what is the best option that you have. The first one is the business store and business logic. So is actually the business logic the same between the stores that you have? How many business stores do you have actually? Is it the same business store? Is it just different physical stores? Then you have the data size in the load. What's the actual size per each store? Is it high, medium, low? For the load, it's exactly the same. Not only the load for the storefront, but also the load of the data that you are actually putting on the data import, the data exchange layer. Therefore, it is very important factors. Then the admin users, they should be actually sharing the same access, or they have a limited access per store. The data isolation rules, the same. Should actually all the stores share the same customer base, but not the same products, or should all the stores have a global catalog, but not the same orders or AMPs that are shared. So there are some rules that needs to be defined in no one before deciding. And the most famous one is actually the region and the country. If they are actually sharing the same region, or they are in different regions, it is one country, multiple countries, as well as finally the third-party integrations. Sometimes you might have the same third-party integration, be it a PM, be it an ARP, be it a PSP, that is going to be used for all the stores. But sometimes you might not be having this use case. You might be having one country using one ARP and third-party integration, another one, different one, and therefore it is a very important factor in deciding which setup is. So you need to gather all the requirements that are related with these main high-level factors. And once you're actually clear on, I would say, 99% of these topics, because this is just a very high level, but once you are really clear on these functional and non-functional requirements that you have, then you actually need to decide on what is the actual future rollout plan. So you have initially the go live details, but then you need to gather more details actually on 1 year after the go live, 2 years after the go live, 3 years, etc. And this is something that actually can impact the initial target architecture, the initial choice of the multi-store setup. And it would have, I would say, either a positive or a negative impact after the go live, based on the requirements that you gathered beforehand. So I think I see a question. Are there any guidelines or benchmarks on the data side to decide the setup option? This is the most famous question that is not only externally, but also internally. We cannot really choose that as a factor because sometimes you actually have the data set size, which is 10,000 products. Let's take this example. And you might consider this low, medium, depending on what you consider as a shared size, but we can say small. However, actually, you might be having 16,000 attributes for these products, or might be having possibility of 10 variants, or 10 concretes per one abstract product. Or you might be having thousands of merchants that can create all of them possibilities of product offers within these 10,000 products. Therefore, the initial the data set size is really not something that can be clear to identify if this is a big data set size or not, because you need to gather all the details of all the data set size, all the entities. And then on top of that, you have the customizations. For example, how often do you actually pull or push the data from the database? What are the third-party integrations that you added on top that are actually interacting with the database itself? So they are entangled, I would say. But to answer the question on what is a big benchmarks on the data set size, it's still really not clear from our side on the exact number. And I don't think you would ever get the exact number on what is considered a small set size or a medium or a big. This would be decided upon after you actually provide all the details, the previous factors, and then based on that, based on the customizations, based on the data import process, the frequency and all of that, it would be decided if you actually have a small set size considered in regards to the rest of the factors, or if it is a big data set size in that regard. So they are entangled, and it's really not something that you can decide separately. I hope that is providing you some clarity, Seti. Okay, I will just then move ahead. Then here, I want to take an example of a business use case, automotive, for example, B2B case. Here, you are receiving the requirements from your tech team or from your business analyst team or from your, I would say, boss in work, and you get these requirements. Operating in a single country, maintaining a small catalog, signed new contracts with few partners, and they are starting the expansion of their customer base and offering to different countries. So this is the very, very high level, I would say, description of the use case. And then they provide to you a very, I would say, not detailed description of the requirements. So they would say that the initial go live would be, I think I see that there are some questions. I will just move ahead with this use case, and then I will answer the question afterwards. So in this case, we have the initial go live in Poland. This is what you receive as an information. They would like to increase the data onboarding, be it product, be it customer, whatever, just increasing data onboarding. And then they would like to add some additional customizations, third-party integrations after 4 months of the go live. So the assumptions that you would be taken in your side as a tech owner of this topic, okay, the go live would be in one country, Poland. The data set size, they said to you, it's a small catalog, so you would consider it an XS. The load XS because it's only within one country, and they already mentioned to you that it's a small customer base in the beginning. Then the increase in data onboarding, you would assume that, okay, the data size would be increased because they would be having more products, more customers, more data point entities, and therefore you would increase it to the data set size S. This is just from your own interpretation, right? Assumption in this case. The additional customization to party integrations, you would assume that this would not impact the data size, neither the load, which is just an additional coding of third-party integration that need to be included in the flow, but not visible load, right? Then they would like to roll out to Germany. However, they would like to have different prices. The same catalog, but different prices for the German country. And afterwards, they'd like to add more customizations that are only specific for this country. And then finally, increase in data onboarding because they will be having new partners. And in that regard, it would be increasing also in counting basket size because they will be onboarding more companies to their platform. And from you as an assumption, again, you would need to be playing with the data set size in the log, just from a high level. So the data set size would be an S+, so it's more on the higher side of a small and go into the medium. The additional customizations would not change this. The increase in data onboarding would increase the data set size to a medium in this case, because you don't have a very clear details on the requirements, right? The increase in, and this is not something that I would actually advise to do. You would need to gather as much as you want these factors on the numbers that are related with the data set size and loss. But I'm just giving you a use case where it's not very, very clear and you are making your own assumptions. The increase in card basket size would impact actually the load. And the next step, or I would say the go live plus 1 year and a half, 1 year, 4 months, would be the rollout to France. And they would like to have fully separated data, limited access to the admin users, and the functionalities would be sharing some features from the main one, but not all the customizations. They would go ahead and add additional customizations that are specific to France in the end. And also they are estimating an increase in orbits. So in the end, the assumption that you have go live plus 2 years is a data set size M, load M, and the go live is the data size XS, load XS. Now you have this use case of these requirements that are not very clear. You need to map them according to what I mentioned previously. So we take a table and it's just try to do this from a very high level. You have the criteria, you have the requirement go live, and then you have the requirement go live plus 6 months to 1 year, requirements go live plus 16 months to 2 years. The region is not changing from all these requirements that was provided in this use case. The countries are actually increasing. So the first one is 1 country, the second one is 2, and then the last is 3. The business stores is exactly the same according to the previous use case. The data set size is exactly what we collected. XS, then you have an S plus S and then an M. The load, the same. And the data isolation in the beginning, since it's 1 country, it's not applicable here. Then in the requirement, the still said it's shared data, just different prices. And finally, for the actual France go live, they would like to have an isolated flow. So you try to map the requirements in this regard. From our side, we do have some templates actually that can support you with fulfilling these details. Normally, when you would like to get some multi-store setup decision or concept or help, we do provide and we send some, I would say, scale-up scenarios template that needs to be fulfilled, not only with this, but with more details, more on a lower level, number of products, number of merchants, number of customers, peak loads, etc. So all of these details need to be normally collected. I will show you the templates in the end of the session. Then you have the final, I would say, requirements, the third-party integration and the admin user access. So for the third-party integrations in the beginning, it's NA, it's not applicable. Later on, it's a mix. Some of them are used for Germany, some of them are only specific to Germany, and the last one is a mix also. Some of them are global, some of them are specific to the country. Here I'm saying store because it means business store. It doesn't mean country always, it means business store, because you can have a store map to a country, you can have a store map to a region, you can have a store map to store, a business store. So I just call it store, but in your mind, you can just assume it's a business store. And finally, for the admin user access, it's exactly the same, 2 shared and 1 limited. Now for the scenarios, you have 3 scenarios, the 3 setups that I mentioned to you in the beginning, the 3 options. You can always apply all of them to any requirements that you actually have. So in this case, I actually will put a hold, and I see some question regarding the multi-store setup in portals. So for this, I think I would answer it later on as well. I will provide all these details before I would move to the use cases for the complex. I will answer both of the questions. So at least at this point, I just want to explain to you that there are 3 different options that we have initially. And all these 3 options, they are applicable for all the requirements that you might have. Sometimes I can assure you that any requirements that you can receive, you can fit it somehow into one of these options. But then in the end, is how you can actually, what would be the best option, but not what would be the working option. So for the best option, I will tell you these 3 scenarios. And based on these 3 scenarios, I would like to get your opinion on what you think is actually the best scenario fit here based on this high-level requirements that we received from this business user. So for the first scenario, you would actually go with this first setup. You have 1 shared database, storage, Redis, search, Elasticsearch. You would try to use the persistent ECL for admin users limited access. So for France, you will apply the persistent ECL feature from Spryker side for each entity so that it would only show the data per store in the back office. For the business logic separation, you would use the code buckets. For the additional customizations for data separations, you will need to add some more customizations because not all the features are actually per store. So you might need to check which features are relevant, and then you need to add additional customizations. And finally, since you have a size plus M, you are not really sure. So you might be adding some additional data processing optimizations to change queries from N plus to batch operations, to have a multi-queue processing, to optimize overall the data processing process itself, or the data import and the data exchange. So this would be the main, I would say, touch points that you would need to do if you would go with the first scenario. The cons would be that you would have a higher complexity because you have all the stores together. You have the additional customization to separate the data for France on the entity level, on the persistent ECL level. And you also have these additional data processing optimizations that you need to apply. So higher complexity would default lead to a higher maintenance in this case, higher performance focus required. So any new feature that you will be getting, you need to, that is touching the data import or the data itself, you will need to think is actually how many interactions am I doing with the database, because you are very cautious and careful about how many queries you make to the database, because you have a shared database, you have data set M here, M plus, I assume it's a lot. And you need to be careful overall with your performance, with the implementations on the project level, performance-wise. So you would be having an extra time to market for the features that you would be actually developing on top of what is existing. And finally, you have a shared load impact in deployment. So this is the same infrastructure. There is a chance that there might be some downtimes caused by whatever reason it is, and it would be shared for all the stores in this case. So it would mean that it's a little bit lower reliability for all of the stores. And also deployments, since it's a shared deployment, any wrong or a bug in the deployment itself, or afterwards, it would be impacted on all the 3 stores. Now, for the second scenario, you would go with the same, just the logical database is separated, which is the second setup. It would be almost the same, just the difference is that you would not need the customization for the data separation, and will not need to apply this persistent ECR for the admin user limited access. But the rest would be almost the same. The additional data processing optimization will not be the same size as the first one. The first one is plus M, this one is minus M, because you would actually be having 2 different databases. Therefore, for the ones that are sharing between Poland and Germany and the one that is France, I would say to some extent, it would be a little bit more manageable because the throughput for each one of these databases would be directed to the specific business store in this case for these 2 databases. So it would be less focused, but not minimum, but still less than the first option. So the cons need performance focus, not full, not higher, but mid. The shared load impact deployment is still the same. It's mid reliability because you actually do not have the deployment in 2 tables on one database, but 2 databases. So actually the schemas are in the migrations and in the changes that you do for the France database would not impact the Germany and the Polish database. So there is a mid reliability, not low, but mid. And then the final point is the separated data. So you might not have the possibility for shared catalog if you have this requirement because it wasn't clear in the requirements. So there is a chance that later on you would want to have a shared catalog between these countries. So in this case, in this option, you will not have the possibility for that out of the box. You might need to add some synchronizations, implementation to sync between both of the stores in index, in Elasticsearch index. So there are possibilities to do it, but out of the box, it would not be possible to do it between these 2 databases. And the same for the customer base, etc. And finally, for the last option, you would actually go with the scenario 3, where you have a separated AWS accounts, and you would separate it, Germany and Poland in one, France one in different AWS account. Code buckets would still be required for the Germany and France, and in case in Germany and Poland stores, and in case you actually will use the same code base, not a separated code base for 2 of these use cases, you would still need to use the code buckets within for the France as well. But you have a possibility here to have a separate code base only for France, for its own development team, and for it, since it has its own deployments. So there is the option to apply this here. And finally, the data separation, performance, and deployments is all fully separated between these two AWS accounts. So the cons here, I just try to focus in the cons here, not the pros. So the cons here is that the separated data, so still you will not have the possibility to share the catalog out of the box between France and Germany and Poland. You might apply a sync process between the publish and synchronize process or an API call, backend API call that would be actually updating the data into all the other indexes, all the other Redis and databases between each other. So there is a possibility that you can implement it, but it's not out of the box. And finally, the data import process, it would be separated. So if you have a shared files by default, or you would need to actually run the data import process in 2 different AWS accounts. So this is mostly the cons between all these 3 scenarios. So based on the assumptions and based on the use case that I said to you guys, I want to get your opinion on which one of these scenarios that you think would be the best fit according to what we have actually collected from these requirements here. You can just put, I would say, the number in the chat, either 1 or 2 or 3. Again, none of the options are wrong, so there is no wrong answer. I just want to get your opinion, what you think as a tech owner of the topic, when you have been faced with these requirements, what you think is the best scenario that you would recommend to go with. I will give you guys 10 seconds, and then I will move ahead. I will assume that you all took the least favorable scenario in that case. So we have Andre, choose 2. Christian, 2. Seti, what will be the difference in cost for the customer? This is, like I said, you are faced with this requirement. I have exactly the same information as you have. You need to recommend at this point what would be the best scenario based on the information that you have without moving ahead. Okay, this would be the last answer, and then I would go. Okay, so we have 3 actually, 3 choose the second option, and 1 person choose the first option, and none choose the third option. And then, again, like I said, there are no wrong answers. It's just based on the requirements and what you think is the best option, best scenario case here. We have someone actually that chose the third scenario. So for the people that actually went for the first option, there is one factor, and this is a good idea to start with for the go live, right? To go with this scenario since the beginning. However, you are not actually sure at what time, well, not at what time, you are not actually sure 100% if the actual, I would say, rollout for Germany would still be after 6 months, or it would be later on, or it would be earlier on. But the only information that you have is that on the MVP, it needs to be 1 store. Therefore, this would be the best option if you are a person that got the requirements at this stage, right? This would be definitely the best option. However, if you are a person that got the requirements at, let's say, this stage, and they are already live, and they would like to roll out after 2 months, then definitely the second scenario would be the best use case. However, if you actually however, if you actually got the details after, we say you got the requirements here, and the store is already live, and they would like to expand to France, roll out to additional 1, then still the second option would be the best fit. Why I'm saying that it's depending on when you got the requirements and depending on the stage of the project, which I didn't mention in the beginning on purpose, because actually any steps of this use case, in any stage, you could have the requirements coming to you to expand to a new store. It could be in the beginning, which would be the first setup, the best use case. It could be after 6 months of the rollout, and then they actually came to you, who would like to have the multi-store setup. Then still here, you can decide either to go with the first option or the second option. Still, to the rollout to the Germany, this first option is still the best, because you have a shared data, you don't want to add the overhead of 2 databases. However, if you get the requirements at this stage here to roll out to France, so they're already live after 1 year, and they would like to go to roll out after 6 months, France with separated data, then the actual second option is the best scenario. The second scenario is the best option. So the factor that I didn't mention previously, and I wanted you guys to also think about, is the future rollout and at what stage we are in the project, and what actually is the next requirements that we have at hand. It's a very important factor, because collecting all the requirements, this is a must. Because if you actually go ahead and in the beginning you choose the scenario 3, and you are in Poland, from the beginning, or sorry, let's say in the Germany, and you decide to go with the second option. You want to have a separated team, separated infrastructure. You don't know, you would like to have a high performance with zero care about the load and all of that, with separated, I would say, data. You can manage it. You can import in both of the AWS accounts. It's not a problem. However, it would be an issue if later on they actually would like to share the data with another store rollout, or they would like to, I would say, didn't fulfill the data load or the data set size that they mentioned. So you have an overkill setup with an overkill deployment process, with an overkill development process, and you actually went ahead because you wanted to go with the last, to fulfill the last go live after plus 16 months. But in the end, it actually does increase the costs and increase more complexity than it is required. So the requirements and the actual stage of the project are very important, and the future rollout is very important aspect. This is why I said to you in the beginning that all these three scenarios actually are correct, because at any stage of the project, any of them could be applicable. The third option could be still applicable in the last rollout to France, because actually the data set size might be huge and the load might be huge. And you would like to have you started having a newer team that are only managing the France store, that they are only managing the integrations for that specific store, that specific country. So it might be good to actually have an isolated code base, have an isolated development flow for that store, because it's big, it brings more revenue, it needs more focus, and it has even more features and customization. So the scenario tree would be a great option there. But then jumping ahead and choosing that without gathering all the details and getting to that stage, it would be, I would say, gambling and a risky decision. Therefore, to answer you guys, so the first option would be great here, would still be great here. The second option might be great here. The third option might still be great here after you actually had all the details and the increase orders, specifications, and all of that. But the most important thing is to not restrict yourself in the beginning and go with something that you actually cannot expand. Therefore, if you go with scenario tree in the beginning, you might not have a global catalog, and this would actually restrict you. If you go with the scenario 2 in the beginning, the same happens. You might be restricting yourself for the German country in this case. So keeping flexibility in the beginning, making sure that you can always go to the other setup is very important. But also you need to gather for the non-functional requirements. If you have the clear non-functional requirements of a high load, high big data set size, and a totally different setups and business logic, then definitely would go with the scenario tree in this case. Okay. So I would just then answer the questions before I can move ahead. I think that there was initial question, or how can we scale Elasticsearch to support 16,000 attributes? That would mean your indexed fields would be way beyond the recommended number of 1,000 fields. 16,000 attributes would definitely not be proper requirements gathering, depending on the use case, right? So if you actually need 16,000 attributes for searching, filtering, there might be some gap there. Maybe it's more kind of a property to the product, but not an actual attribute that you need to configure for the search and for the filtering itself. So you need to check actually what is needed from the business user to play with in the back office for the search and for the filtering, and what is only a property of the product, just that you want to display, but you don't want to use in the search preferences or the filter preferences. And I would assume that 16,000 would still not be the case. It would be definitely lower. But if you would need anyways to scale it to support 16,000 attributes, you would also need to check the performance of the import process, because attribute is actually being populated in multiple different tables. And it's also in the publish synchronizing different data points. We will need first to focus on the additional data processing optimization, and then for Elasticsearch on actually the scale up and also the request size that needs to be handled properly. But 16,000 attributes is definitely something that would need to be first clarified and I would say guided towards the proper approach. I hope that would answer your question. Great. I think the second question was from Patrick regarding the multi-store setup. Data imported is sometimes about master data. For example, categories might be global. If the persistence is separated, data need to be provided per store, or there is a master store pattern with access to all store. So this use case, let me explain if I actually understand your question correctly. So you have some data points that are global, or some entities that are global, but the rest are actually specific only for the store. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So it depends again on which data point or which feature, because there are features that are supporting per store, right? So you can have the context of the data point per store, but there are some other data points that are not per store. And in this case, you would need to customize it accordingly. But if you need, for example, global categories and you need a specific, product per store, this is something that can still be managed. So something that would require you to do anything extra at this point. But not all the features are supporting the per store context. There is a list of them that are supporting it, and the rest you would need to implement it accordingly. I think moving ahead, timescale could change during the project in France, might only come after 2-3 years. Exactly. So this is why I mentioned that the future rollout in the point or where you are in the projects are very important to choose the option, because we really do not know what would be the change of the future path of the actual business that you are working on. But it is important to gather the requirements beforehand. Even though if you are not sure, if you have the number somewhere, you can't provide it, it needs to be collected because it would actually give you an overview on if you are making the proper decision at that time or not. And I think finally, it might be nice, I think Patrick said, might be nice to add these different multi-store options into your GitHub in parallel to Spryker B2C demo shop, additional to the multi-store documentation. Yeah, so normally there are these, the multi-store setups are already in the public documentation, but I'm not sure. Okay, so you mean that they could be actually a part of the... Yeah, I'm not sure actually what you mean, Patrick. I don't want to be jumping to conclusions. I do know that actually all the 3 options are available in the public documentation in this way. With different details. However, I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, yeah, I see. Okay, I think that might be a good idea. I will check with the documentation team to maybe these use cases would provide some more details and help while deciding. Yeah. Yeah, I see. So the numbers is very hard to put because it can be, like I said, really misleading for people in the beginning. This is why the data point, the data set sizes, we try to be careful with it because sometimes it might be really big, but it's only the catalog, not the rest. It's manageable, it's still considered small, but sometimes it might look small, but actually it's big based on other factors. But yeah, I think I get the point for your side. Okay, I think the thing that I wanted to mention here in the end of the presentation, but maybe it might be worth it here, is that there is an actual feature called dynamic multi-store. It is an early release, currently in beta. It is actually solving few of the aspects and few of the scenarios where it would be a good fit. It is not covered in this session, but it doesn't contradict the detail that I'm providing here at any point. So just keep in mind that what I'm presenting here is not related to the dynamic multi-store, but it could be fit in some of the use cases or the examples that I'm providing. So maybe for people actually during the call, if you already checked the documentation for the early access, I might actually invite you to take a look and see and think where it will be a good fit for you. We actually have Andre also in the call here, who is the expert in Spryker side with the dynamic meetings for, if I am not wrong. Okay.
Yeah, more like gatekeeper, actually.
Sorry?
More like gatekeeper
Yes.
than expert.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm running early access to dynamic multi-store in Spryker. Currently, we're onboarding several clients. And yeah, if you are interested in, just ping me and we'll discuss.
Thanks, Andre. Then I think I would move ahead. There is just one last question. Do we have an approximate percentage of active customers by which option they are using? Not really, because you have you still have some customers that are actually using a mix of options. You could have the option one part of like the option one and option two part of option three, one of these regions. So it's really not always one option that is followed. It could be a mix, but yeah, I think an approximate I can check internally and I can let's see if we can collect that. I cannot really promise you, but I can check. The most famous ones that I'm aware of, at least that I was involved in, are actually setup 3 and setup 1. The setup 2 also I have seen it, but since this is something that was introduced newly, I wasn't involved that much in projects using it, but still I have seen it in 2 at least projects. But this first setup and the third setup are the famous ones, especially the first, and the third is famous for the regions and for the performance handling. Okay, now for the complex use cases. I will just jump, I will not be showing you the path and the exercise, I will just give you the use case here of shipping and logistic B2B use case. You have an actual 2,000 business stores in different countries, different regions, and they have an XL size of the list of products according to them and managing a complex pricing system. So mapping the requirements in this complex use case, you have one region plus one region because it's multiple regions, not clear. Countries, since various countries go with 1 plus 120. Business stores, they said business stores 2,000 plus, but you're actually not sure if this is a business store, meaning it's a different business logic, or just a business store, just a store, just a physical store, just a touch point, just a, I would say, service point. So it's not very clear. So you keep it, in this case, at least in the requirements here, in this point before deciding. The data set size is L. They said XL, so I'm not sure, so L. The load is high because they mentioned that it's in various countries, global company, and actually they have shipping and logistics with B2B, so they have a big cart, let's say, big cart sizes. Data isolation is not clear, but let's say shared data, but some products should be restricted in some business stores, right? Third-party integrations shared, admin user access limited per business region, right? So the grouping on the option, on the scenario that would be, is actually the third option, because you have 3 different, this is a use case, actual use case. So there are integrations that are shared. Still, it could be using within the same code base. Since it is in various different regions, you try to group the regions into actually how can you define an AWS account, or let's say one setup based on which parameters. So grouping them is a very necessary step here to decide on what can you put together, which countries can you put together, and which countries you cannot put together in the same setup. And this normally matters based on the business logic, based on the interactions with the integrations, and also based on the region. So in this case, the setup would be several AWS accounts with store per logic, business management separation, one per several countries or several in one country, and product restrictions. can be implemented via black and white listening or customization for each one of these regions. Alternatively, like I mentioned, dynamic stores or service points, once released, could be definitely checked to validate that this is a good fit in this use case. Because the business stores, it's still not clear 100% here. Maybe they are the service points, but since in different regions, they have a small business logic differences. Maybe dynamic stores also would be a good fit for identifying this business, for implementing the business stores here. So this option would be the safest and the more fit based on the requirements that they provided here. The only tricky part is grouping it. Which countries can we group in which setup? And then this would be the million-dollar question. And this is why you would need to gather enough requirements to know what countries can you group and what countries you cannot group. And what would be the factors that you would use is the shared data, the load, but mostly the shared data, the business logic, and the third-party integrations. If you can have this together, then you can put them and group them together. And the region, of course, is the most important one. If some of the aspects are yes, some no, then you can actually decide if you can still put them together or they are more fit to be within other group of the AWS account or of the setup of the multi-store. This is a complex use case. It's complex because it's not clear, but this would be the safest option to go with. Just it would be definitely more time planning, more time deciding on what group of countries need to be together. And this would involve not only the technical team, but also the business owners to provide clear details on the grouping itself and all the requirements. The second complex use case here is B2C, let's say food and beverage. You have one region, around 1,000 business stores in different countries with an XL size as well, and products and managing complex details. Here, region is one, countries could be 20, business stores could be around 50 per country. They identified this. The data set size in the end, it was around M, not an XL. The load, because an XL is for them requirements plus 2 years or 3 years, right? But for the go live is M. The load is medium to high. It's not clear. The data isolation, some parts are shared, some parts are not clear. So the exact number will be defined later on after the go live. And the third party integration is shared. The admin user access is full. OMS, in this case, is exactly the same process per country. Some countries might have more, some no, but still it's this one OMS per country. The pricing, products should have different prices per different store. I added these requirements here just additional on top of what we had more to provide you more details or clarity on this use case. So here the scenario, actually the best fit is the first scenario, because at that point you don't have a lot of details that are not provided, and most of the requirements that are provided here could be fulfilled with the first setup, with the first scenario, I would say. How it would be solved, so the requirements for, like I said, one region setup is fulfilled. Countries and business stores could be fulfilled with the first setup as well. The data set size M could still be fulfilled with the first setup. The load is not clear, but we could say it could be fulfilled with the first setup. In case of a scale-up requirement during the production time, then this would be handled accordingly, right? The data isolation is some parts shared, so we could go with the shared at this point. The third-party integration, everything, most of them are fulfilled with the first setup. Now, the only thing is that they have one OMS per country, and how this would be solved is actually implementing out-of-the-box merchants as business stores. So you would have 1,000 business stores, 1,000 merchants. It's just an example. Different OMS per different merchant. So you have a merchant per OMS per merchant, which is also an out-of-the-box feature that can be implemented in this use case. Different products can have different prices out-of-the-box merchant offer. Different products per merchant also. This is something that is out-of-the-box provided. So some of these details for the pricing in the OMS could have been solved in this use case with the merchant as business store representation. And alternatively, again, the dynamic store in the service points actually could be replacing this implementation or this customization that was done in this case to solve the requirements. So this is still complex use case, big data set, not clear requirements, but as you can see, the first scenario or the first setup was the best fit for it. So really the ticking the box on the criteria beforehand, especially on the point where you are at that project, it is before the go live, you need to just focus on the MVP, gather all the details, but focus on the MVP and leave it flexible to change the option later on according to the requirements that you have. Finally, so the summary, I see that I have only 4 minutes left. So the summary, if I would just put it here, is understand the business use case, what is the business model, how the business store work, what is actually a business store, how they are split, how you can group them based on the business logic or not, the amount of data now and future rollout, the shared separated data among the business stores, the countries and the regions, and how business stores are actually working in these countries and in regions, the same RMS, different logics, different third-party integrations, etc. The data, how is it managed? So different teams, ARPs, or admin users and permissions. And finally, including the future rollout. So the future expansions they need to be a part of not a part at that starting point of the decision that you take, but there needs to be flexibility to actually cover these future rollouts later on. How you would roll out, this is something different. It's not a part of this session, but the most important thing is to pick the option that fits perfectly for the MVP or for the go live for that point where you are at the project, and leave flexibility to cover the rest of the requirements or the RFRs that you have in the scale up scenario, or plan it accordingly with the proper feature rollouts to cover it. And I think that's it from my side.